back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to review two books that I recently read, the first of which is an audiobook that I was sent by the author for review, and that is Vendetta's Rise, and the second one is one of the SF masterworks that I picked up the other day because of people who voted on my Patreon. So thank you all for voting, and that one is Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang. So let's get started. I'm going to talk about Vendetta's Rise to start off with. This is a self-published book, I believe, and it was sent to me free of charge by the author as an audiobook, so I listened to that. So I can't really comment on what the spelling and grammar and things like that are like in the original. So this is definitely a fun kind of elven storyline. It has a lot of classic fantasy elements, so we are following a young character who is stolen away from his family by a group called the Black Rabbits, and the Black Rabbits kind of take this tithe of people to come and join them as recruits, and it's a way of life. It's an assassins guild, and they are trained to become assassins, and basically they are kind of like bullies to the outlying towns. They force people to give their sons and daughters as recruits, but in exchange they do protect their towns. So it's a bit of a harsh deal, and it's not really a deal because they don't really get a choice. But of course we follow a character called ElleKayEm who ends up being taken away from his family and trained as a black rabbit. So that is the crux of the story, and ElleKayEm is a character that I think kind of grows on you as the story goes on. He is someone who's very stereotypically kind of nice in the start. He's someone who looks out for his friends and someone who's very kind and kind-hearted. But as this training of black rabbits go on, we start to see him change into something quite different from what he began as. And he takes on a real sharp knife's edge. He becomes quite good at what he can do in the Black Rabbits, but that's not necessarily a good thing in the wider world because obviously they are assassins. They're kind of considered the bad guys by a lot of people. So we see him kind of slowly change as he becomes something different from what he began. What I like about this book is that it has some pretty fun aspects to it. We follow assassins, which I think is always a good concept. And we also have secret units and political warfare in the book. We're not only following ElleKayEm's progress in the Black Rabbits, but we're also following the king and the king's son, who is called Prince Coda. The dilemma that Coda faces in the start of the book, whether to follow his father and become the king or whether to follow his grandfather and kind of take on sort of a magical role, is quite a big decision for him, and it's only the events of the book that force him to go one way over the other. So he is kind of a torn character. He's someone who's, again, quite kind-hearted in the start, but as the book goes on, and it does span quite a lot of years, this book, it's quite a lot of the childhood that we skip through and also quite a lot of the young adulthood, I suppose, as well. We see a lot of training montages just of Coda and of ElleKayEm as they kind of progress, and the book moves quite quickly through time, which I think is a good thing because obviously you don't want to get stuck in that for too long. The Black Rabbits themselves are a pretty interesting element of the book because they all grow up believing that they are correct at everything, and they kind of almost brainwash people. It's like a cult in a way. They brainwash their recruits into believing that they are doing justice and they are doing the right thing, even though some of the things they do are really, really bad and people would consider them terrible. So that's a pretty interesting aspect. I definitely think the battle scenes in this were actually done pretty well. I didn't expect to love battle scenes because that's something I usually have issue with, but they were done quite well in this, and they feel like they're very fresh and punchy, and they don't really drag out too long, which I liked. But I did feel at times that the Black Rabbits themselves, their mantras became kind of irritating at times, and we get it repeated a lot what they stand for and who they are, and people are kind of trying to reiterate the Black Rabbit way a lot, and I got a bit tired of that at times. There are also some flashback scenes for the character of Legion, who is a character who trains ElleKayEm when he first joins the Black Rabbits, and I like these. I thought they really helped to flesh out his character. However, I do think maybe some of them were plonked in a little clumsily and maybe could have been put in at different times, but on the whole it was an interesting addition to the story. Overall, it was a fun listen and one that was very easy to listen to, so I ended up giving it a solid 3 out of 5 stars, and I'd recommend it if you are looking for a fresh kind of assassin story that definitely has a few surprising moments and a good bit of characterization as well, so that was good. The next book I want to talk about is this one, Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang by Kate Wilhelm. And this is a story that I'd never really heard of before I was given this SF masterwork, and I'm really glad I read it because I'm actually super intrigued about this author now. I hadn't heard of her and I've not really heard much about her since, but I'm intrigued if any of you guys have read her other work. I believe she was more famous for short fiction than some of the other authors who are in the collection, so do let me know if you've read anything else by her. This is a fairly short book. It's actually a book that deals a lot with cloning, and that's something I've not read an awful lot about recently, but I do find completely fascinating because science is one of those subjects that I kind of have to be in the mood to read about, and I was in the mood when I went into this one, which was great. So this story takes place in a world where chaos and natural disasters are kind of taking over. The world has reached a limit, population has reached a max, and the natural resources are being reached, and it's basically kind of turning into a disaster globally because everywhere there are shortages, everywhere there is extreme weather and drought, and people just aren't surviving. There's diseases rampant everywhere as well, and it's just not good. So in this world, they've already started cloning things like sheep and cattle, but at the point we join the story, they haven't really started cloning people until our family that we're following kind of decides that's what they're going to do. They live in a fairly isolated spot in the world and they have the resources to buy up laboratory stuff and test out cloning on humans. So that is what we follow. And this book spans loads of generations. It's not just the starting people that we're following. We follow a main character called David, who is part of the family. He's very heavily invested in the cloning and the ideas of it, and he knows a lot about it. So he is a kind of key participant in setting up the cloning and finding out what limits can be pushed and what limits can be broken and how far they can take cloning humanity. So he's a big part of the development, and we see what happens when the first clones come out and they are actually developing quite well, and they raise these clones, and then we follow the generation of clones after David is dead and gone, and we follow later and later generations. So what I liked about this is that it certainly looks at the ideas and the theories of cloning quite detailed, but it still feels quite simple, so it's not something that is overwhelmingly tricky to understand or anything like that. I think it's an easy enough read if you're familiar with sort of science of cloning. And I mean, I only did like GCSE level science, so I got it from GCSE level science. And I think that it's definitely got an approachable side to it because all of the characters feel very easy to kind of understand. I wouldn't say I fully connected with any of the characters in this because they feel quite detached and inhumane at times. David as a character, our first main character, is quite likeable and you can kind of understand who he is because he is human. But as the story goes on and as the clones become more and more detached from humans and what humanity kind of stands for, I felt like I was getting distance from the characters and I wasn't really connecting on the same way because they kind of developed different quirks and traits. For example, because people are being cloned, they are kind of coming out in batches. So they have like 5 people who are all part of the same clone, and they therefore can kind of almost sense one another. It's not quite telepathy, but it definitely has echoes of that. And I think it's a really, really interesting look at what would happen if we just cloned people multiple times and then let them all grow up together and develop a society. And there's a lot to like and think about in this book, and it's really, really thought-provoking. So I enjoyed it for that element especially. I do think as the story went on, the action kind of ramped up a little bit because in the start it's a bit of a slow mover. But for me, I think this one was kind of the right level of science and fiction. It definitely felt like there were adventurous moments where the characters did things and explored things, but there were also a lot of moments where the characters were just at home thinking or contemplating their ways of life, and that really kind of built up those characters a bit more. So overall, I thought it was fascinating, and I ended up giving this a really solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. I'm definitely intrigued about the author and this whole concept in general, so if you have any other recommendations, then do let me know. And that is everything for this review. So let me know your thoughts on both of these books if you read them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys! Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.